So, hi everybody. I am Cassidy Questorf. I am the executive director of Klamath Film, and with me today is John Robson, the creative mind behind Safety First. John, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So this film was created during COVID, kind of a commentary on COVID, but it's not anything like anything I've seen before, kind of COVID related. So how did this idea kind of come to mind, and what was that process like?
Yeah, so a little bit of backstory. Coming up to Portland, I moved out for a job as a commercial director with House Special, who used to be the commercial branch of Leica, and they separated and sort of became their own entity about a decade ago. And I moved out about 6 months before the pandemic, and a big part of what I wanted to do was work live action with real people. And we did a little bit of that. We obviously do a lot of animation and stop motion, and then suddenly the pandemic hit, and I was working from my home office in a basement, and all live action production was at a halt, and we were trying to figure out new solutions for how we can tell stories without actually having people. And this was great because it was sort of like I still had a job and was getting by, but at the same time, I really sort of felt that emptiness of not actually working with real people, and in the process, just sort of as a byproduct of working in character animation and just like wanting to explore new technology, I started creating this sort of this way to animate digital humans through photogrammetry, where you basically can photograph and capture a person that looks photoreal, and then bring them to life through animation. And so it was sort of in a lot of ways a test and a learning process. But what I found was the evolution of the process allowed me to sort of tell these stories with human emotion without actually having real actors, which was kind of exactly what I needed at the time to get through, until things got better.
Yeah, absolutely. Which, of course, kind of may have taken a little bit longer than all of us expected during the pandemic. But yeah, so how did you manage that? So first of all, was this a technique that you had used before in animation? And how did you avoid kind of the uncanny valley, and what were your hesitations there?
Well, so my background is in 3D animation, mostly motion graphics, but then kind of got into more like 3D animation, and obviously working with House Special as a character house. But my background is not character animation, like not the traditional sense, like Pixar characters and whatnot. I don't know how to rig a character to work, and even if I could, I couldn't animate it properly. So I was looking more in sort of like new technology, like motion capture and using like motion libraries and sort of like manipulating things that already existed. So, a lot of the animation in Safety First comes from, Mixamo, which is like a popular one that people use, but basically it's just a library of different captures, right? There's everything from, like drunk walk to capoeira, and like if you sort of mix and match these together, sort of take animations from one and the other, you can start to blend it in a way that looks like the action that you want. So that was part of it. As far as uncanny valley goes, well, I knew that was sort of an area that's just problematic when you get more and more realistic. But for me, I just decided to sort of double down and make it very surreal, and not try to convince people that it's a real thing. It's just it's its own universe where the eeriness and the unsettling, feeling, it just sort of echoed how we were already feeling being so isolated.
Ah,
So,
true.
there's this strangeness to it. I mean, like it doesn't feel right, but at the same time, it also there's something very human about it. And I just sort of went further into that rabbit hole of exploration. So in many ways, it was sort of like the first time I'd done an animation like this, and it became sort of like an evolution of my process and in my style of how I create films.
Wow, absolutely. And that's so interesting because it is such a unique style. It's really not like anything that I've seen. And so when you were creating it, I mean, without kind of dialogue necessarily being the main driving force. It's music and it's visuals. So how did you decide on both of those aspects to kind of play into that storytelling arc?
I mean, at first it almost felt something like a music video, and actually, initial tests it was a much shorter thing. It kept evolving into a bigger process. Stylistically, there were color schemes I was working with, and obviously there's like blue and pink, and it's this sort of like masculine, feminine, but it becomes much more androgynous in a lot of ways. And I think even the style itself like sort of evolved from where it was from initial tests. Um, and I feel like it was a long enough process where I think I was working on it for probably a year off and on. Things would change. I would cut things out, or I would come up with new ideas. So it was a lot of like small vignettes of different ideas that I put together, and the music ultimately strung it all together. So when I started working with a composer to make the score for it, that really helped drive it, because then it sort of it gave me the sort of the blueprints to finish the areas that I wasn't sure what would go in them.
Yeah, that was kind of my next question because if it, with a music video, it's kind of the movements are exactly coordinated with the sound and everything like that. So when you were making it, how far along were you, and how did you end up really kind of tuning it exactly to the music? What was that process like?
Yeah, I mean, I'd started with a piece of music that was a bit more tongue in cheek. It was kind of like a Chromeo style, like like kind of like humorous and upbeat, and it set sort of the BPM, right, so I could get the rhythm going, but it didn't quite fit the mood. And then when I started working with Fab Martini, who's the composer, he had a different vision for sort of how it would sound, and I gave him that space to just see like what he would come up with, and what he created had a lot more emotion to it, and it sort of changed the whole sort of mood of the film, which was great. There's the whole epilogue section that basically happens where the person's sort of confronting another version of themselves. That didn't exist until you know I was 90% done with the film, and suddenly it just hit me. So it was definitely like it wasn't all sort of planned out from the start. In many ways, it was just sort of this process that just like that during the pandemic, we didn't know what was going to happen next.
Right.
So it just sort of kept growing into something else as it went along.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's kind of one of those cases where art mimics life and, vice versa. So that's really interesting though, and, as far as it being like a creative project and, kind of really touching on what we were all going through in the pandemic, as far as, like, getting it out into the world and reception, what was that like? And, kind of seeing people's reactions to it, and especially during the times of COVID, I mean, it's really an interesting time to put something out.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a stylistic standpoint, people were really impressed. From a technical standpoint, it was
Yeah.
definitely interesting. Like it's not the most realistic thing, it's not the best thing, but I think definitely you could see the work that went into it in the time. I think for some it really hit close to home just based on sort of what they were going through, and I that was kind of the point, because I like I've got a wife and kids, and I had a job. A lot of people were in way worse situations, so I was okay. But
Right.
then suddenly there was just this point, and I don't know when it was. It could have been like a year into it, when suddenly I realized I was not okay, and I didn't know what it was. And I think it was just sort of it was the rock bottom that we all hit in one way or another, right? So I think for some it was really like easy for them to resonate with. Some people thought it was more of like a political thing, like a mask versus, not. I mean, obviously, it started as sort of like that satire. So for some, maybe it just sort of it stops right there. And then there are obviously people who were, um, you know, had pandemic fatigue. So this is like, late in the pandemic, this comes out, and maybe people don't want to hear about this anymore. They want to move on. So I'm curious to see how it ages. Like as time passes, like, is it a, sort of like a perfect sort of, I don't know, time capsule of a feeling at the time, or is it one of those things where it just like, you look at like a, like music from a certain time period and it feels very dated. I don't know, but it is a, you know it exists as that sort of, you know that moment for me, and hopefully for other people if they can relate to it.
Absolutely. It's so personal in a way, as almost like a journal entry would be like, this is how I'm feeling and this is my visual representation. But it also is like a historical relic in a way, just from that time period. And in that same vein, I think it's just done so masterfully with kind of these themes that a lot of people were feeling. And maybe when you watch it, you're like, whoa, that really does perfectly like visually take it, even if I didn't hear people say the same things that I was thinking. So major kudos there, technically and stylistically. Like it's just beautifully done. So we're really excited to have it in the film festival. But yeah, when did you release it? You said it was about a year in or so. And how was it released? Like, how did you get people's feedback from something like that?
Man, I want to say it was like late 2021, early 2022. And I think I just, sort of put it like online. I don't have a
Put it
huge
out
social
there.
media following,
Yeah.
so it had like somewhat outreach, but kind of not like, even like films I did in the past that did really well on like Vimeo, for example. Like I feel like now like that's changed, right? So it's like
Right.
it's harder for people to have an attention span to watch, a film that's, more than 30 seconds long. So um so yeah, it got picked up on some sort of like motion design type sites, a couple like filmmaking blogs, but just kind of like, it was like moderate success. It's
Okay.
just sort of, it exists. It's
Well,
and then yeah, a couple festivals and stuff, and but like yeah, otherwise it's just like
Well, we're very happy that it exists, and I feel like that's kind of how a lot of personal projects go. It's like, I'm just really happy to make this and to share it with whoever can watch it, and, I don't have a release schedule or plan for it, but I'm just happy to put it out into the world. You kind of touched a little bit on people's, like, attention spans, and I'm just curious, like, in your role as, a director and creative, what would advice would you give to people, or what do you maybe tell yourself, like, how what's my game plan here, what am I going to do in this new world of AI and all these things that are facing creatives, especially in the film world and animation particularly?
I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what your end goal is, because for me, a lot of projects in the past were the goal was to get it seen by as many people as possible, to have some kind of success, through numbers, right? Likes, views, a staff pick on Vimeo or something. Um, and that can be very challenging and exhausting because it's a very small percentage of people who actually do it right. And it's not always like if the project's good or not. Like so many amazing films just sort of like, kind of don't get the spotlight they deserve.
Right.
Um, I mean, in this particular case, like I didn't really care about that because it felt like such a personal accomplishment. It was something to me that like I was speaking from the heart, and I
Absolutely.
feel like it's a different type of project, right? When I'm working on commercials, like I'm trying to target a certain demographic. Um, doing things for in the past for like companies like Xbox, we had to like wow people within the first 5 seconds. And like the longer videos, even trailers, a lot of times they'll show like a quick 5 second montage at the beginning to just sort of show you these are some really cool moments. So please, like stay.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad idea. It's kind of weird, like when it first happened, but now it's sort of common. Um, but I mean, it's a tough thing to answer, like I feel like all that sort of like short content is great for little impressive things, but you can't really tell a story in 30 seconds. I mean, well, you can, but but it doesn't give you much time to develop. And then when you get into things like live action and into like sort of shorts you would see at a festival, right? I mean, they can go anywhere from a couple minutes to like 30 minutes or something, right? So it's tough. It's I think again ultimately it's your goal. Because if it's something that you really truly believe in and it feels unique, I think there's a place for it, you know. And when you mention something like AI, it's so easy to generate content now with AI, but the perspective of a storyteller is still something that's very unique, you know. And if you look at the scripts that say ChatGPT writes, they're all kind of the same.
Yeah,
Um, a good script is a good script, and you can tell as soon as you can, you know, identify that storyteller's voice. So, you know, a
totally.
lot of it's about that is just sort of finding something you really love and doubling down on that idea, you know, even if it's not destined for stardom.
Yeah, wow, I love that, and such great advice, and I'm sure that'll resonate with a lot of people. It definitely resonates with me. And it's funny you mentioned, well, I mentioned AI, but with ChatGPT, we recently did our summer youth film fellowship, which is free to middle and high schoolers, and we kind of teach them how to make films for a week. And we did like a ChatGPT section where it's like, okay, whose idea? Like, let's see what kind of script like it makes. And it felt like sacrilege, first of all. I was like, "Oh, I feel so weird about this right now." Like, just so the kids know, we are not teaching you like to use this. Just kind of doing like an acting thing. But yeah, it was hilarious, like what the script was, and it's just such an important thing to remember. Like, you know, human perspective and storytelling is such a fine art, and it's so unique to each individual that I definitely don't think that that can really take that away. So great point and great thing to reiterate. Absolutely. But John, is there anything else that you'd like to say about safety first or about the process or any tidbits?
Well, I mean, I guess kind of just an interesting byproduct of this. So, like, you know, I said it had marginal success as a film or, you know, something being online, but um, you know, in many ways, this was an evolution of sort of this storytelling process and this technical process that I came up with. That, you know, it's not 100% unique. Like there are other people that do similar stuff, but you know, I found my voice in it, and like ultimately, it led to a new career where, you know, I was directing commercials for years, and Samsung reached out to me and hired me. Basically, they have a whole department with digital humans,
Oh my
which
gosh.
is like, you know, so they were watching my work, you know, quietly, and basically, I mean, you know, ultimately, it's sort of a big shift where now I'm you know, still developing, you know, these tools and sort of like this technique, and I'm able to tell stories, but sort of uh like sharing and learning that knowledge in a way that we're, you know, trying to create digital versions of humans that can become more convincing and, you know, tell stories. And ultimately it's just sort of this, you know, this thing where like a hobby, where something I was doing on the side during the pandemic led to actual work. And you know, it allows me to continue to sort of like explore that process and, you know, improve from there, and come up with new techniques and stuff. So
That's amazing. I mean, you know, I feel like I hear all the time, like follow your passions and you know, things will follow if you give it everything. And so that's a really amazing and special story to kind of see it in practice. So congratulations, John. That's really exciting. Very, very cool. Very well deserved. It's an awesome film and amazing technical skills too. I can't even wrap my head around it. So but John, thank you so much for this time, and thank you for being a part of the Klamath Independent Film Festival. We're so excited to have Safety First and to share it.
thank you, Cassidy. I appreciate it.